Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is clearly so desperate to change the channel from what's going on in their own caucus. 1 week ago today, a member of that government caucus was caught in a human trafficking sting. Later this morning, this government will be introducing a bill on that very topic. What message does the Premier think it sends to the women of Saskatchewan that a member of his caucus was caught in a human trafficking investigation?
Recognize the Premier.
Within an hour of me finding that member was removed from the governing caucus, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government provides nearly $30 million a year to support women. Mr. Speaker, I made very serious comments with respect to what a government should be doing, Mr. Speaker, and later today you will see a bill that will be updating the Human Trafficking Act in this province, Mr. Speaker. That's transparency that this government is providing, Mr. Speaker. We would wish and hope that the same transparency would be provided by the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker. On November 20th, we had the unprecedented act of this legislature being shut down. Government was not able to conduct its business, Mr. Speaker. Both leaders were out in the rotunda where the Leader of the Opposition indicated that no one from their caucus was involved in organizing this protest and this shutdown, Mr. Speaker. We've now been informed that on November the 14th that the governing caucus actually hosted the organizers of this group at Tommy Douglas House, Mr. Speaker. Why did the Leader of the Opposition not disclose this to the media?
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, increasingly, this tired and out-of-touch government is so desperate to change the channel from the problems in health care, from families facing challenges on the cost of living, and from the never-ending stream of problems coming from their own caucus. Let's recap, Mr. Speaker. A member of their caucus charged in a human trafficking investigation. Another who owns a hotel where the price was jacked up more than 50% when the public started paying the bill. That's right. Yesterday, we asked the Premier to call in the auditor. Why won't he do that?
Recognize the Premier.
All questions that have been asked and answered on the floor of this legislature throughout the week, Mr. Speaker. What hasn't been answered on the floor of this legislature or in the rotunda, Mr. Speaker, was did the opposition caucus, pardon me, not the governing caucus, the opposition caucus, Mr. Speaker, and the opposition leader meet with the organizers of that protest on November the 14th, hosting them at Tommy Douglas House? Why didn't she tell the media, and which caucus members were there?
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, did not even come close to answering the question about the auditor. But this government, this tired and out-of-touch government, keeps flailing from crisis to crisis. Again, Mr. Speaker, the member from Cutknife Turtleford charged with a serious criminal offence, the member with from Regina Northeast with jacked up rates in his hotel, one that received $172,000 of government funding from social services last year alone. Mr. Speaker, Brad Wall had the courage to call in the auditor to investigate the GTH. Why won't this Premier show some courage and do the same?
Recognize the Premier.
The auditor can investigate any government operations that they so choose, Mr. Speaker. One member will be meeting to confirm there's no conflict of interest with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner upon his return from mourning his brother's passing. The other member, no longer a member of the governing caucus. The question here today is to the opposition leader and the opposition caucus members. Why did they host the organizers of this week's protests, Mr. Speaker, in a secret meeting at Tommy Douglas House? Who was at that meeting and what demands were made?
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is so distracted by their own pet projects and so distracted by their own caucus in disarray that they have simply lost the plot and the focus and failed to focus on the things that matter. That's right. At all the time, Mr. Speaker, all the time and energy that this Premier is spending managing his own members' bad behaviour and shoring up his right-wing base on pronouns, that is all time and energy that should be spent focused on the cost of living crisis, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're focused on. We've called for this government to pause the gas tax for 6 months to provide some relief. Why won't the Premier do that today?
Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, I will offer advice. It's free advice, so the Leader of the Opposition can take it for what it is worth, Mr. Speaker, but maybe what the Opposition caucus should focus on is being straight with Saskatchewan people, indicating to Saskatchewan people why they held a secret meeting with organizers of the group that shut down the work of government in this legislature in an unprecedented action on November the 14th at Tommy Douglas House. Tell Saskatchewan people which members of her caucus attended that meeting, what was discussed, what demands were made, and what they agreed to.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, this Premier and that Finance Minister are so caught up managing the issues in their caucus that they're mismanaging the top issue facing Saskatchewan people, the crushing cost of living facing families today. Worse than doing nothing, Mr. Speaker, they've made things worse, piling on with a slew of new taxes and costs. The result, we lead the nation in mortgage arrears, and families are barely getting by. Now is the time for action. Now is the time to offer some relief. Why won't the Sask Party scrap the fuel tax for 6 months, as we've called for?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I've answered that question so many times, and the $2 billion that's in each and every budget that gives relief to Saskatchewan people. He knows full well that Saskatchewan is the most affordable province in which to live, and in fact, if a person lived in BC, they would have to pay taxes on $19,300 more of income and have a higher PST. Manitoba, Mr. Speaker, they'd have to pay taxes on $19,800 more, and they have a higher PST, Mr. Speaker. But the question I'm very interested in, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, because his question's been answered time and time again, was he at the secret meeting?
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
As for secret meetings, Mr. Speaker, I can assure no members were at any secret meetings last Thursday at 2 o'clock after the 75-minute debate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan people are breaking the bank to fill the tank. They're barely getting by. And this tired and out-of-touch government isn't focused on providing needed relief. They're focused on their own scandals and mismanagement. Public dollars wasted at the Sunrise Motel, on the Premier's Pavilion in Dubai, billions more on the bypass and the GTH, and so much more. There's no end to the money they'll waste on their pet projects, but nothing for families. Why won't the Sask Party scrap the fuel tax and give some relief to families who are facing a crushing cost of living?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, again, that question's been answered numerous times in this Assembly, and the tax relief that this government gives to residents of Saskatchewan. But it's interesting, you know, Mr. Speaker, I do find that the member's office social media is quite entertaining, and he will post whether he's hunting, what his time with family, and it is great posts, and he has posts whether or not he's in a hospital bed or the groups he works and the functions he goes to. But you know what, Mr. Speaker, there was absolutely not one post about the secret meeting. Was he there?
Recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing Saskatchewan people when it comes to the cost of living, when it comes to democratic principles in the legislature as well. Yesterday, we learned that Sask Party government is requiring the vetting of all members of the public who wish to access the legislative galleries.
Shame.
But the minister said in the rotunda, quote, "We're not precluding anybody coming into the building," and quote, "This is not about restricting anyone's access." Let's be very clear, Mr. Speaker. This is the people's building, and it belongs to the people of Saskatchewan, not that government. How does the Minister of Corrections and Policing justify restricting Saskatchewan people from coming here into their own legislature?
Recognize the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first off, I want to thank all of the members of the Legislative District Security Unit that were here to keep everybody that's on this floor, Mr. Speaker, that were in the galleries, Mr. Speaker. There are guests here. There were guests here yesterday, Mr. Speaker. We're not impeding anything, Mr. Speaker. We've been very transparent about what we are doing to make sure that people are safe. What, Mr. Speaker, isn't transparent is about their secret meeting, Mr. Speaker, that they held a week before to make sure.
I need to caution, there's a number of the Premier and Minister of Finance and yourself have been referring to caucus business. You're not to refer to another party's caucus, what they do at all. So please refrain from doing that. Minister?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There was a secret meeting from the opposition caucus, Mr. Speaker, that was being.
I ask the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety to withdraw and apologize that comment. I just warned you not to say that. Withdraw and apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw and apologize.
I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Speaker, perhaps the minister will actually try to answer one question today, unlike anybody else in that government who's been skirting every single question that the people of Saskatchewan have asked us to ask, and they are doing everything but answer. Mr. Speaker, if they don't want to answer questions about security in the building, they could have kept it independent. You know what was also great at keeping this building safe? The Sergeant at Arms was great. For decades, Mr. Speaker, this new policy requires 72 hours of notice with names and addresses provided, and members of the public, those who want to simply show up on the day of proceedings to watch, won't be permitted without approval from the director of the LDSU. Will the minister scrap this directive today and keep the People's House public? You're here.
Recognize the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've had guests in here yesterday. There are guests here today. Nobody's been impeded from being able to get into their building, Mr. Speaker. We're very proud of this. Mr. Speaker, this was a policy brought forward by the Independent Legislative District Security Unit, Mr. Speaker, that they brought forward. A civil servant with over 20 years of policing experience has brought this forward, suggesting that this is what we need to be able to keep the people safe. Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed that the Leader of the Opposition is condoning that what we are doing here is somehow impeding people. Mr. Speaker, there are people here in the building right now. They're welcome to come down to their building, and they'll continue to be welcomed in their legislative assembly.
Here, here. Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it's right there in the directive in black and white. If he doesn't agree with the directive, then he can withdraw it today as the minister responsible. Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government has zero credibility when it comes to protecting our democracy. In fact, time and time again, they have taken steps that erodes our democracy. They also have zero credibility on accountability. Yesterday, we asked the Minister of Social Services 10 times if he would call in the independent provincial auditor into the matter of the Sunrise Motel, an investigation badly needed when a hotel owned by a Sask Party MLA jacked up the rate more than 50% when the public started picking up the tab. Later today, I'll be bringing a motion. Will the Sask Party government agree to opening the books to the provincial auditor, yes or no?
I recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, as we've gone over several times in this House and answered many questions on this matter. I've agreed directed the ministry to look into the policy procedures around hotel usage, Mr. Speaker. We're also going to try and get the information the member has asked for as soon as possibly can. We'll get that out as it becomes available to us. In terms of the auditor, Mr. Speaker, that independent office can look at any matter as to do with any ministry, Mr. Speaker, and if they choose to look at any situation, of course, we cooperate and they come up with recommendations and in several different areas of the ministry, and we do our best to enforce those, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of transparency, Mr. Speaker, I wonder why the NDP voted against the privilege motion to look into the NDP involvement in the shutdown of the legislature just a few days ago, Mr. Speaker.
Here, here. Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
We voted against it, Mr. Speaker, because we will remain laser focused on the things that matter to Saskatchewan people. And Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan people expect basic transparency, basic accountability when it comes to public funds. That is why we have an independent provincial auditor, so she can investigate and make sure public dollars aren't being wasted, that we are getting good value for money. So, Mr. Speaker, it begs the question, what are they hiding? And you know, Mr. Speaker, before I got elected, I was a defense lawyer. And if they were truly innocent, usually the best defense was just to tell the truth. And you know, the minister, before he was elected, he was a professional football player. Doesn't he realize that running interference for a teammate playing dirty is a bad look?
I recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Quite the unfounded accusations from that member, Mr. Speaker. My understanding is the member from Northeast will meet with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner when he returns from dealing with family matters. Mr. Speaker, I've asked the ministry to look into this situation as to what policies we can do, but at the same time, keep people safe when they're in vulnerable positions, particularly as we come into the winter, Mr. Speaker. We'll work to get that information as soon as possible out, and that member can obviously take a look at it and use the mechanisms within this chamber to scrutinize that situation. But what I'd like to know as well, Mr. Speaker, in terms of transparency and letting people know, does the NDP leader agree with her member that Israel is guilty of genocide?
Here, here. Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we have always known on this side that as the Sask Party scandals rack up, as they falter more and more, as they limp from crisis to crisis, they would get desperate, they would get nasty, and that is what you see on full display today, Mr. Speaker. So again, to the Minister of Finance, to the Premier, to the Sask Party Cabinet, to the Ministry of Social Services, will he allow the independent office of the Provincial Auditor to open up those books?
Recognize Minister of Social Services.
As I said before, the ministry is going to look into policies and procedures. The auditor can look into any matter that they so wish, Mr. Speaker, and we will cooperate with that at any time. We have in the past, Mr. Speaker, on very different and many different matters within the ministry, Mr. Speaker. But it's interesting. The member opposite admitted they don't have transparency. What are they trying to hide by not having their members appear before a potential privilege motion or privilege process right here at the legislature for what happened? They voted against it, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, here. Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have been pressing this government for weeks now about the crime rate in our province. I ask them again, how could they let the crime get to the epidemic levels that we are seeing? How could they? It's completely out of control, and I have yet to hear an explanation from them. The crime statistics coming out of the city of Prince Albert are shocking and unacceptable. According to the Prince Albert Police, violent crime for the city increased by 56% in 1 year, from 21 to 22. Assaults increased by 70%. Robbery increased by 63%. Break and enters are up 56%. These increases are in just 1 year. We are seeing similar dramatic jumps in crime all over the province, Mr. Speaker. I ask the government, is this the kind of growth that is supposed to be working for everyone? Or is this what the government thinks building and protecting is?
Recognize Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very proud of the actions that this government has taken to make sure that we are keeping our communities safe. That's including the Marshal Services and all of our crime reduction teams, which the Marshal Service will be based out of Prince Albert, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I'd like to be able to put on the record for this is that member over there sat in our caucus for 12 years with me. Never heard a word about this, Mr. Speaker. Never heard a word about any of this, Mr. Speaker. Never even spoke up on an issue, Mr. Speaker. Now, all of a sudden, she seems to find her voice. She had various positions within our government, sitting on committees. Never heard a word about this, Mr. Speaker, but wow, does she be able to find her feet when somebody's writing her speeches for her. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, they wouldn't address the crime rate when their constituents were struggling, but now that they are being pushed by the Saskatchewan United Party, they've decided they will do something. Mr. Speaker, I'm constantly being contacted by residents across the province about vehicle theft. In Prince Albert, motor vehicle theft increased by 25% last year and is on track to increase by another 20% this year. The per capita vehicle theft rate in Prince Albert is 4 times higher than Toronto and 3.5 times higher than Saskatoon.
You guys could come join her.
It's even higher per capita than the highest-ranked city for vehicle theft in the USA, Mr. Speaker, Bakersfield, California. Can this government give any explanation for their catastrophic failure to protect our Saskatchewan citizens?
Recognize the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'll remind the member of what we've done as government. Production teams that have been very effective, Mr. Speaker. Our Warren Intelligence team, Mr. Speaker. Our teams that we have been putting into hotspot areas to make sure that crime is suppressed. We're working with local municipality police. We're developing the Marshal Service. We're very close on announcing our Chief Marshal, Mr. Speaker, on this to be able to address the issues that that member is bringing forward specifically. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to making our community safe. That's why we've been working with social services, with health, with our local municipalities, with our First Nation policing to make sure that all communities are safe for everybody in Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surecom Industries has just announced it will be permanently closing all its facilities in the province. After we pressured the government in May about their failure on tire processing, they assured us that Surecom tire stewardship situation would be handled. The Premier himself gave assurances, and yet now we are learning that this government did not handle the situation. It has spiraled out of control. Saskatchewan is now losing its only value-added scrap tire processor in the province. This falls directly on the Premier and its government. How can he build or protect anything in this province when he loses a made-in-Saskatchewan success story business? A business now closing permanently as a result of this government's mismanagement of its agencies while importing foreign operations. Mr. Speaker, what does the Premier have to say for this complete failure of his government?
Recognize the Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're indeed disappointed to learn, only through the media, that Surecom and Tire Stewardship of Saskatchewan could not reach an agreement for the northern processor in the province. Tire Stewardship of Saskatchewan is committed to implementing several actions with the report done with Cam Swan with an aim to improve tire recycling in the province of Saskatchewan. Mr. Swan was also engaged to help in the implementation of this action plan. The ministry and Mr. Swan closely monitored in negotiations as well, but had no direct role in said negotiation, and Tire Stewardship of Saskatchewan is not a government agency. Any questions regarding the negotiations should be directed to the Board of Tire Stewardship of Saskatchewan. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
The epidemic of crime has got so bad the residents of Tisdale are looking at how they can take matters into their own hands to protect their community. Last night, we attended the Community Watch meeting in Tisdale, which focused on introducing a Citizens on Patrol program, similar to what the town of Nipawin had to do. Over 250 residents were in attendance. They are frustrated and out of options. Tisdale finds itself with an understaffed RCMP detachment in a closed courthouse and jail thanks to this government. As a result, the officers in Tisdale had to make a 3-hour round trip to Melfort just to book one suspect. Can the government explain why our rural communities have understaffed RCMP detachments and closed jails and closed courthouses while we're experiencing an unprecedented crime epidemic?
Recognize the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we've been able to work with our municipal police forces as well as the RCMP again to make sure if the communities are safe in our province. Mr. Speaker, if there is an issue in a specific area of the province, it's the municipality or the RCMP's job to be able to contact us, and we will be able to provide supports. We've been doing this throughout the province to be able to suppress crime in specific areas. And Mr. Speaker, the feedback that we've heard from municipalities is they are thanking us for this service to be able to have us so they can feel safe in their communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Why is the Government House Leader on his feet?